January 17, 1943. Somewhere along the frozen ridgeline outside Faid Pass, Tunisia. The morning broke cold and colorless over the dorsal mountains. Frost clung to the scrub brush like fine sugar, and the wind carried the scent of diesel and dust across the valley floor. Inside the steel belly of a Panzer IV, Oberfeldwebel Klaus Hartmann adjusted his headset and watched the horizon through the narrow vision slit. The engine rumbled beneath him, a comforting heartbeat of German engineering. He had driven this machine across half of North Africa. He trusted its armor the way a knight trusted his plate. 30 millimeters of hardened steel separated him from the world. It had deflected British 2-pounders at Gazala. It had shrugged off French anti-tank rifles at Kasserine. As the column rolled forward into the pale Tunisian dawn, Hartmann felt invincible. Across the Atlantic, in a basement workshop in Bridgeport, Connecticut, a different kind of war was being waged. Engineers hunched over blueprints spread across wooden tables, refining a weapon that would rewrite the mathematics of battlefield survival. They called it the M1 rocket launcher. The soldiers would call it something else, something simpler, born from a comedian's joke and a strange resemblance to a musical instrument. They would call it the bazooka, and in the hands of a single infantryman, it would make the impenetrable penetrable. For 3 years, the German Panzer divisions had rolled across Europe with an aura of mechanical invincibility. From the plains of Poland to the steppes of Russia, from the deserts of Libya to the hedgerows of France, the tank had become the symbol of blitzkrieg, lightning war. The doctrine was simple: concentrate armor, break through enemy lines, exploit the gap, and encircle. It had worked in 1939. It had worked in 1940. It had worked in 1941. The Panzers were not just weapons. They were psychological instruments. The sound of their treads churning earth, the roar of their engines, the crack of their guns. These sounds preceded surrender. Infantry scattered before them. Anti-tank guns were either too heavy to move quickly or too light to punch through. The tank crews knew this. They wore their confidence like a second skin. But warfare is an evolutionary process. Every advantage births a countermeasure. Every fortress finds its siege engine. And by the time the Wehrmacht met American forces in North Africa, the Americans had learned something the Germans had not yet realized. You did not need a bigger tank to kill a tank. You needed a better idea. The bazooka was born from desperation and innovation in equal measure. In 1942, as American forces prepared to enter the European theater, military planners faced a brutal reality. The standard anti-tank weaponry, the 30-70mm gun mounted on half-tracks and towed behind trucks, was barely adequate against early German armor. Against the newer Panzer IVs and the rumored Tigers, it would be suicide. American infantry needed something portable, something a single soldier could carry and fire from a foxhole or a rooftop, something that did not require an engineering degree to operate. The answer came from a scientist named Edward Uhl and an Army officer named Leslie Skinner. Working with shaped charge warheads and a simple tube launcher, they created a weapon that weighed 14 pounds and could be operated by 2 men. The shaped charge was the secret. A cone of explosive that, upon detonation, focused its energy into a superheated jet of molten metal, capable of burning through steel like a blowtorch through wax. The first bazookas arrived in North Africa in late 1942, distributed quietly among infantry units preparing for Operation Torch. The soldiers did not know what to make of them. They looked crude, almost comical. A 5-foot pipe with a wooden stock and a wire mesh shield to protect the gunner's face from backblast. There was no scope, no complex machinery, just iron sights and a trigger. Veterans of the First World War, men who remembered the grinding futility of trench warfare, eyed the weapon with skepticism. How could this hollow tube stop a 30-ton tank? Klaus Hartmann did not think about American ingenuity As his Panzer crested the ridgeline that January morning, he thought about the mission: secure the pass, cut off the American supply line, push toward Tebessa. Intelligence reported that the Americans were green, inexperienced, poorly coordinated. Their equipment was untested. Their officers were uncertain. The 21st Panzer Division would sweep through them like a scythe through wheat. Hartmann had heard the radio chatter from other crews, jokes about how the Americans carried too much gear, how they complained about the food, how they fought like tourists. The Wehrmacht had faced the British Eighth Army, battle-hardened and cunning. The Americans, by comparison, seemed soft. The column advanced in formation, 7 panzers spaced at 50-meter intervals, their turrets rotating slowly, scanning for targets. The landscape was barren, broken only by clusters of rock and the occasional stone farmhouse. Somewhere ahead, concealed in a dry wadi, a 22-year-old private from Ohio named Leonard Fisher lay on his stomach, gripping the front end of a bazooka. His loader, a kid from Tennessee named Jimmy Calhoun, crouched beside him, a rocket cradled in his arms like a newborn. Fisher had fired the weapon exactly 3 times in training. He had never seen a German tank up close. His hands were shaking, but not from the cold. The 1st Panzer came into view, its hull painted in the mottled tan and brown camouflage of the Afrika Korps. Fisher waited. His sergeant had told him, "Let them get close. Let them think they are safe." The tank rolled forward, treads clanking, its commander visible in the open hatch, scanning the terrain with binoculars. 200 meters, 150, 100. Fisher exhaled slowly, aimed at the center mass of the hull, and squeezed the trigger. The rocket ignited with a sharp crack and a plume of white smoke. It streaked across the desert floor, a blur of fire and metal, and struck the Panzer just below the turret ring. The shaped charge detonated on impact. In the span of a microsecond, the explosive collapsed inward, creating a jet of molten copper that reached temperatures exceeding 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The jet burned through the 30-millimeter armor plate as though it were paper. Inside the tank, the effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The jet penetrated the crew compartment, igniting ammunition, hydraulic fluid, and fuel. The Panzer shuddered, belched black smoke from every seam, and stopped moving. Hartmann, 200 meters behind, watched in stunned disbelief as the lead tank erupted into flames. The commander, still standing in the hatch, scrambled out, his uniform smoking, and tumbled onto the sand. Hartmann's radio crackled with panicked voices. "Contact front! Infantry anti-tank! Wiederholen! Infantry anti-tank!" It was impossible. Infantry did not kill tanks. Infantry ran from tanks. But the evidence was burning in front of him, a pillar of oily smoke rising into the pale sky. Hartmann shouted orders to his driver, trying to pivot the Panzer to present a narrower profile. But before the turret could traverse, a second rocket lanced out from another position. This one struck the side armor, punching through the storage bins and into the engine compartment. The Panzer shuddered and died, its engine coughing a final gout of flame. Hartmann and his crew bailed out, scrambling through the top hatch and running for cover behind a ridge of rocks. Behind them, their machine, the machine they had trusted, the machine that had carried them across a continent, burned. The battle at Fayed Pass was a small engagement in the grand scope of the North African campaign, but its psychological impact rippled far beyond the casualty reports. For the first time, German tank crews faced an enemy that could kill them from positions they could not see, from distances they could not predict, with weapons that weighed less. For the German soldiers, this was a profound and disorienting shift. The Panzer crews had been trained to view themselves as the elite, the cutting edge of modern warfare. They were the inheritors of a tradition that stretched back to the cavalry charges of Frederick the Great, now mechanized and unstoppable. To be killed by a foot soldier, a single man with a hollow pipe, was humiliating. It violated the natural order of battle. Reports from the Eastern Front had mentioned Soviet anti-tank rifles and Molotov cocktails, crude and desperate measures by a cornered enemy. But the bazooka was different. It was not crude. It was precise. It was American. And that precision carried with it an unsettling implication. The Americans had outthought them. The bazooka became a symbol, not just of firepower, but of American industrial philosophy. It was cheap to produce, simple to use, and devastatingly effective. It did not require years of training or a specialized crew. A factory worker from Detroit could learn to fire it in an afternoon. It embodied the democratic ideal applied to warfare, power distributed to the individual, not concentrated in the hands of an elite few. The Germans had built their military around the concept of the expert, the ace pilot, the veteran tank commander, the seasoned rifleman. The Americans built theirs around the concept of the system, standardized equipment, interchangeable parts, mass production. The bazooka was the infantryman's equalizer, and it terrified the men who had spent years mastering the art of armored warfare. As the war ground on, the encounters multiplied. In Italy, bazookas ambushed panzers on narrow mountain roads where the tanks could not maneuver. In France, during the hedgerow fighting after D-Day, American infantry teams stalked tigers and panthers through the bocage, firing from concealed positions and vanishing before the turrets could turn. The shaped charge warhead did not care about the thickness of the armor. It cared about the angle of impact and the chemistry of the explosion. A well-placed shot could mission-kill even a tiger, the 60-ton behemoth that German propaganda called unstoppable. The crews learned to fear the telltale plume of smoke, the whistle of the incoming rocket, the sudden flash of impact. They learned to button up, to stay buttoned, to never expose themselves. But even that was not enough. The bazooka found the weak points: the engine deck, the turret ring, the rear hull. It hunted them. Private Fisher survived the war. He returned to Ohio, worked in a steel mill, and rarely spoke about what he had done in Tunisia. In his nightmares, he sometimes saw the German commander tumbling from the burning Panzer, his uniform smoking, his face twisted in shock. Fisher had killed men that day, not with a bayonet or a rifle, but with a weapon that erased the distance between killer and killed. He had looked through the sights, aligned the crosshairs, and sent fire across the desert. It was clean in a way that other killing was not, but it was killing nonetheless. The bazooka had made him powerful. It had also made him complicit. Klaus Hartmann survived as well. He was captured 2 weeks later, part of the general collapse of Axis forces in North Africa. In a prisoner of war camp in Mississippi, he spent long afternoons talking with other captured tankers, trying to make sense of what had happened. They had been the best in the world. They had trained harder, fought longer, believed more deeply in their cause. And yet they had been beaten not by superior tanks or better tactics, but by a hollow tube and a shaped charge. One of the men, a commander from a Tiger company, said it best: "They did not need to outfight us. They only needed to outbuild us." The Americans had not produced a handful of wonder weapons. They had produced tens of thousands of simple, effective tools and put them in the hands of millions of men. The bazooka was just one thread in a vast industrial tapestry, but it was the thread that pulled the armor apart. The symbolism of the bazooka extended beyond its tactical utility. It represented a philosophical divergence between the two war machines. The Germans designed weapons for heroes, tanks that required skilled crews, fighters that demanded ace pilots, rifles that prized accuracy over volume. The Americans designed weapons for citizens, tools that any man could wield, systems that depended on logistics rather than genius. The bazooka was not a weapon for legends. It was a weapon for farmhands and factory workers, for clerks and college students. It did not require nobility or breeding. It required only courage and a steady hand. And in that simplicity lay a profound democratic truth. Power belonged to the many, not the few. By the time the war ended, over 500,000 bazookas had been produced. They had knocked out thousands of tanks, fortified bunkers, and machine gun nests across 3 continents. The Germans developed countermeasures, spaced armor, skirts, tactical adjustments, but the damage had been done. The aura of invincibility was shattered. The Panzer crews who had rolled across Europe with such confidence now approached every hedgerow, every alley, every hilltop with caution. The hunter had become the hunted. In the years after the war, military historians debated the true impact of the bazooka. Some argued that it was overstated, that improved American armor and air superiority were the real deciding factors. Others pointed to the psychological dimension, the way it forced German commanders to alter their tactics, to disperse their armor, to lose the concentration that had made blitzkrieg so effective. But perhaps the truest measure of the bazooka's impact was not found in statistics or after-action reports. It was found in the memories of the men who faced it, the tankers who learned to fear the infantry, the crews who understood, too late, that steel alone could not win a war. On a cold January morning in Tunisia, a young man from Ohio looked through a simple sight and changed the calculus of warfare. The rocket he fired traveled only 100 meters, but its echo traveled across oceans and decades. It whispered a truth that empires and armies and ideologies struggle to accept, that ingenuity can defeat tradition, that simplicity can overcome complexity, that a hollow tube in the hands of a determined man can melt the armor of inevitability itself. The bazooka was not just a weapon. It was a statement, and the statement was this: in a war between the many and the few, the many will find a way.